Hello everyone, welcome to this project called AI Writing Assistant using MERN stack, and that is MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js utilizing OpenAI large language model called GPT-4o mini. And the purpose for this project is to correct grammar, advanced spell checker, and intelligent rephrasing. By the end of this project, you can utilize any large language API to build your future project. Before that, let's see the live demo for this project, and we are going to implement authentication using a third-party library called Privy. Don't worry, we will get into code, but before that, let's look at the live demo. And before using this project, unless you log in, so if I click on the start writing now, it has presented to me the login in or the registration page. So in here, I'm going to log in by using any of these login authentication methods, either by my email or Google, or by using a wallet, or we can sign up using GitHub or Apple, and also by SMS. So I'm gonna log in using my Gmail account. Alright, I have successfully logged in, and these are the interface for this application. We have the input field, and this is where our approved corrections will appear. I'm going to enter some text with some grammatical errors. For example, it says that, how are you today? Let's add today. So I'm going to check the spellings. And here it says that, how are you today? Let's eat today. And let me check the grammar errors. And it has given me the correct grammar for this. And I can rephrase by highlighting it. And I have the rephrasing here, and I can go ahead and rephrase, and these are the possible sentences. So assuming that I like this one, I will accept it and it will appear here. Likewise this, and likewise one of these. So guys, this is what we are going to build. It looks simple, but we are going to learn a lot. And before continuing, I will urge you to subscribe, comment, and like this video to promote me to do more videos like this. With this one being said, let's get into code. Before that, let's look at the logic behind this application. For this application, we are going to have these components. The first one is our front end using React, and then Node.js for our backend, and OpenAI model for the main logic. So now we are going to tune or fine-tune OpenAI to perform the task that we want. So in here, we're going to implement a logic or a prompt to check for grammar, and then for rephrasing and spell checker logic. This is what we call the prompt engineering, of which we are going to give it to this AI to be able to perform what we want. Now, after we have prompted or fine-tuned OpenAI, it is time for us to use our backend to consume these logics. This means that we're going to have an endpoint that's going to consume this logic called grammar checker, likewise the spell checker, and then the rephrasing. Well, we can directly allow our React application to consume these logics or the endpoint. But why do we need backend or Node.js in the mix? Having our custom backend to consume the OpenAI endpoint will give us more flexibilities, and also it can help us to add more advanced features. For example, in case we want the user to log in before using this application, having your backend is the best way to go. And let's say that we are going to turn this project into a SaaS project. This means that unless a user subscribes to a plan before using this application, then having your backend is the best way to go. So by the end of this project, you can enhance this. And also, in case this video got more views, likes, I will add more features to it. So let's say that we are done with the backend implementation. Now it is time for the user to use our project. So first of all, when the user click on the grammar checker, it will hit our backend. Then the backend will direct that request to any of these endpoints to retrieve the result. That's all what we are going to do. Alright, so let's get back to code and then do something with it. We are going to use Node.js, and in case you are not familiar with Node.js, then you can check my MERN full stack course. Alright, then we're going to use Vite to generate our React application, and Privy is going to be our authentication method for this project, and then Tailwind CSS for the UI, React icons, and I have already prepared the final repository for this project. And then we need to have an account with OpenAI. With this one being said, let's get into code. We are going to begin with the API development before moving on to the front end. And we're going to use the final one as the roadmap. At the moment, we are going to ignore the UI. Let's get into code. The first step is I'm going to have a folder called AI Writing Assistant. And I'm going to open it using my preferred code editor, and that is Visual Studio Code. Before I continue, let me show you the extension and theme I'm using in case you might have interest with. For my theme, I'm using what is called Tenacious Design Theme, which is this one. And for my icons, I'm using Helium Icons, which is this one. And let's install what is called Codium AI. And this is going to help us to auto-generate some of the codes that we are going to write. And then Code Spell Checker. This extension is going to help us to avoid typing mistake and better comment to style our comment by giving it a different colors, and also prettier for code formatting. And after installing prettier, unless we activate it, so click on the settings here and then search for format. And under the default formatter, make sure to select prettier. And lastly, we're going to install what is called Tender Client. This is going to help us to test and develop our API. This is similar to Postman. So with this one being said, let's get into it. And after installing the Tender Client, you're going to see the icon here. In case you don't see that, right click on the canvas here on the left sidebar and then click on the Tender Client, which is this one. Alright, now that we have the extensions and theme that we're going to use, let's get started to structure our code. Let me increase the zoom level. We're going to have one folder for the backend or the server and one folder for the front end. I'm going to call it as client. Let's begin with the server or the API development. So let's open this one in the terminal and make sure to initiate npm init --y or yes to accept the default configuration. After doing this, we're going to have what is called package.json file. And this file is going to contain all the packages that our application is going to depend on. And for the main entry point, I prefer to use app.js but not index. Now that we have added the app.js, we have to add it at the root level of our application. You can name it as server or app or index. The choice is up to you. The next step is let's install the packages we may need for this project. The first one is Express for our server. .env is going to help us to access and secure sensitive keys from OpenAI, and also we will need course package to prevent course origin error. And that is it for now. Hit enter to install these packages. It is done. So let's continue to create our server, and that is the app.js. We are going to require Express from Express, which is equal to that. I have the autocomplete using the Codium AI. So let me accept these guys. Perfect. And that is the course and then the instance of the express. We will need the .env file. That is a package instead. So we have the port, but I prefer to use uppercase for this one. And then let's use process.env.port, which means that we are going to have a variable on the .env file. So at the root of the project, add what is called .env, and let's specify the port. For this, I'm going to use 8000. You can use any port of your choice. This means that in case we have a port number on the environment variable, use that. Otherwise, use this one. So let me change this one to 8000. So let's have what is called the middlewares. And the middlewares, we're going to have the course, then the express.json. This middleware is going to help us to pass incoming JSON data, and this is going to help us to prevent what is called cross-origin network errors. And then remove this one from here. Below here, we are going to start our server, which goes like app.listen by passing in the port, which is this, and then the log our server is running on this port. With this one being added, let's run the server. We're going to use node-watch, and the name of the file, in this case, it is called app.js, and hit enter. And this snippet works similar when using NodeMon. So with this one, you don't need to install NodeMon again. So as soon as we make changes to a file, our server is going to be restarted automatically. Now we have our server being running. The next step is that we are going to integrate OpenAI into this project. Before we integrate OpenAI into it, let's have our dummy route. For this project, we are not going to use MVC design pattern. So let's have a folder called route. And for this one, we're going to have a route per each logic. If you look at the roadmap here, these are the functions or the logics for our application: grammar checker, rephrase, and then the spell checker. We're going to have a route for each of these ones. So back to the project, I'm going to add one file called spell checker or spell check. And next one for the grammar check. And lastly is a rephrasing. So I'm going to call this one as analyze. Alright, so before we continue, let's talk about the authentication part for this project. For the backend, we are not going to implement authentication, but instead we're going to implement the authentication on the front end, as you can see for the final one, by using a library called Privy. And for Privy, we can extend by implementing the authentication at the backend. But for this project, we are going to ignore that. And you can improve this project after this. So let's continue with the route. So for the route, let's begin with the analyze. It's going to be a dummy route. So in here, we may need express router. So here as express is equal to express. And then for the route, I'm going to name it as analyze route, which is equal to express.router. And below here, let's export. And it goes like module.export, which is equal to the analyze route. So let's bring in the analyze route, and we have all the HTTP method. What we want is the post method, and the path is going to be /, and then the callback function. I'm going to use arrow function for this one, and we have access to rec and then the response. In the body here, I'm going to send some static data to the user just for testing by saying that message analyze route. Alright, last step is that we have to mount this particular route in the main entry point, and that is the app.js. So below here, I'm going to say route, and it goes like app.use, then the / analyze. So let's import the route up here as analyze route, and the auto import is fine. Make sure to bring the .env import at the top. Remove this one, and the path here is going to be API/analyze, comma, and then the analyze route. So we have this dummy route. The next one is going to be the spell checker. The logics is going to be the same. So I'm going to copy the one that we have done, which is this one, and then back to the grammar check, paste that, and then rename this one to grammar check, and then I will say grammar check route, and let's mount it here as grammar check route. The auto import is fine, and then the path is equal to grammar check. And lastly is the spell check. Paste that, and then rename this one to spell checker or spell check, and the message is equal to spell check route. And lastly, let's mount it here as app.use, and the path here is equal to spell check, and the route is spell check route. The auto imports are fine over here. Now that we have the dummy route, it is time for us to test this route. And we're going to use the tender client. Let me reduce it, and I have the tender client over here. Let me clear these guys, and let's start from scratch. So I'm going to click on the new request, and then in here, I'm going to provide the endpoint. The first one is called the spell check. That goes as http://localhost:8000. Then the endpoint is API/spell check. If you check it out here, we have it as that. Perfect, right? So let me make the request. And for some reasons, I have 404, meaning not found. The issue here is that the method is post, but not get. That's what we specified over here as post. So now let me try again, and I have the response from the API. I'm going to rename this one to spell check, and let me copy and paste, and let me rename this one to grammar check, and the endpoint here is going to be grammar check, and send. I have the result. And lastly is going to be the rephrase or the analyze. So I will say analyze, and then the endpoint here is analyze and send, and I got the result. At this point, we are done setting up our backend, which is ready to consume the OpenAI APIs or the models. So let's visit the openai.com by searching for OpenAI Playground, and after logging in, you're gonna have something like this. And in case you haven't logged in, make sure to have an account. As soon as you have a new account, they will give you free credit to start with. So let's look at the logic behind this documentation when using the OpenAI platform. We have two options to integrate these models into our project. The first one is to use the SDK for various programming languages. For Node.js, they have one, Python, and others. Or we can directly use the endpoint by clicking on the API reference. So after doing that, or after clicking, click on the chart under the endpoint. So click on that, which is this one instead. This one, that is a chart. And this is the endpoint that we are going to use. But in case you are using the NPM package, this is a format. But for us, we're going to use the API endpoint. So copy the URL or the endpoint and back to our project. Let me close all instances of the open files and let me get into the app.js. I'm going to have a placeholder and place the URL over here. We may need it later on. Now that we have the API, let's go through how this documentation is going to work. So let's look at the parameters this API needs. The first one is the messages and then the model that we are going to use. And we can pass in additional configurations like frequency penalty, logit bias, and others. So you can read more what these properties or the argument means. Now that we have the API, next step is that we have to decide which model that we are going to use from OpenAI. If you click on the documentation here, it says that meet the models, and the models perform specific tasks. So here, let's click on the Explore All. By the time of recording this video, the current is GPT-4o mini. So let's explore all. And below here, these are the models from OpenAI, GPT-4o, Mini, Turbo, DALL-E, TTS, Whisper, and others. We're going to use what is called the GPT-4o Mini because it is cheaper as compared to the GPT-4o. Alright, so you know that we're going to use the model called GPT-4o. That's all what we need. And next step is that we are going to fine-tune the model by providing a specific prompt that we want the model to give us. So here, that is back to the project. Let's begin with the analyze. So let's get into the route here, which is this one. And I forgot to install a package called Axios. We're going to use that one to make the HTTP request as Axios. Let me clear it and then rerun the server. Up here, let's import the Axios as Axios, which is equal to that. And then for the analyze or the rephrasing, we may need what the user wants to rephrase. So here, I'm going to make it as sentence instead of text. The naming is up to you. So let's remove the response from here, and then let's bring in try and catch block. In the try, we're going to make the HTTP request. So here I will say response, and then let me accept the autocomplete. And it goes like this. Response await axios.post and pass in the endpoint, the one that we copied, which is this one. Make sure to use the right endpoint for this one. Alright, so we are done with the first step. The second step is that we're going to pass in additional arguments or parameters to Axios by specifying what the OpenAI model requires. Remember, it requires the model and other properties. So bring comma here, then the object. In the object here, we're going to specify the model that we are going to use. Like I said that we're going to use the GPT-4o mini. So let me remove this and I will say GPT dash, and then next one is going to be the messages. For the messages, we're going to have the role as user and the system. Let's begin with the system. So here specify the system. This means that we are going to configure what we want from the system. So the content here, we're going to provide our prompt that goes like, you are a helpful assistant that rephrases sentences. Only return the rephrased sentence without any additional comment or context. At this point, we are instructing what we want from the model. So next one is the user, meaning that the user is going to provide information to the OpenAI model. So here, row here is user, and the content is what the user is providing as sentence. And after this one, that is after message, we're going to provide the following as maximum dash tokens, which is equal to 150. What does it mean? Let's find out in the official documentation. Click on the docs and then the API instead, and click on the chart, and let's look at the maximum tokens, which is this one. The value must be integer or null. This is optional. And this means the number of tokens that can be generated in the chart completion. This means that the higher the token, the more response you're gonna get. but the lesser the token, the few response you're gonna get. But take note, the higher the token, the more usage of your credit. So bear in mind when using the token. And next step is the N. I'm gonna provide N and I will say 3 for this. Let's find out what it means. The N here is an integer, and that is how many chart completion choices to generate for each input message. This means that we want how many options to choose from. Since this one is rephrasing, we want a user to select from multiple options. If you make it at 3, we're going to give 3 options to choose from. And next is stop equal to now, and then the temperature is equal to 0.7. Let's see what it means. We have the stop here is a string or an array, which is optional, default to now. It means that up to 4 sequences where the API will stop generating further tokens, and we have the temperature, which is a number, and that is what sampling temperature to use between 0 and 2. Higher the value, like 0.8, will make the output more random, while lower values like 0.2 will make it more focused and deterministic. Alright, so now that we know the argument that we have passed into the model, it is time for us to pass in our authentication. So let's get back to the OpenAI and get our token. So click on your profile icon here, and then your profile and user APIs. I'm gonna add my API key. I'm gonna call this one as AI writing. Let me generate the token or my key. Copy that and make sure to use your own key. Since this is very sensitive, we're gonna place it in the environment variable, and I'm gonna call this one as OpenAI API-key, which is equal to this. So back to the analyze. As a second argument here to Axios, we're gonna provide what is called headers, which is this pass in headers, and then the value is called content type, and we want to return JSON data, and then the authorization by passing in our key. Remember, we are using .env at the main entry point, which means that we can access the key here in the .env file. With this one being added, let's finish up with the logic. So below here, we know that everything goes on well, and we are going to log something to the user by saying that response.data. Let me remove this one and let's try out. In case something goes wrong also, let me log the error and let me send this message to the user as error.message. Let's get back to Tender Client for analyze, which is this one. Remember, we have to pass in the sentence, and then I will say, how are you, and let me send. And for some reasons, we don't have any response. The reason being that we are not sending anything back to the user. But in the terminal, we're going to have the response as that. As you can see, we have the ID of the chart, the model that we used, and then the choices. Remember that we are using n, which is equal to 3. Therefore, we're going to get 3 responses. So here, 1, 2, and then 3. And we have the actual message on the message property here. And since this is an array, we are going to loop through and send back to the user. So back here, that is the analyze. Instead of this, I'm going to assign to a variable called rephrase sentences, which is equal to the data.choices, and use map to loop through, and we're going to return the choice.message. On the message, we have what is called the content. So in here, I'm going to send back the data as rephrase sentence. In case it is empty, we can send empty array. So let's try out. Moment of truth. Let's send. And we have 3 possible options. If I change the n equal to 10, I'm going to have 10 possible responses. As you can see, it worked. Now we are done with the analyze. The next one is going to be the grammar checker. So I'm going to copy everything in the try here. The logic is going to be the same. The difference is going to be the prompt we're going to figure in or put in. So the grammar check, remove this one from here. The first modification is going to be the prompt. So here, remove this one and replace with this. And this one goes like this. You are a helpful assistant that checks and corrects grammar errors in the following text. Only return the corrected text without any additional comment or context. So in here, we're going to pass in the text, which is equal to const the text. Let me change this one to text to make it more descriptive. So here, replace this one with text. And then for the end, we're going to return only one. So let me return the 1 or 3 from here for the analyze. For the grammar check, we're going to return only 1. Because of that, we don't have to loop through, but instead, so remove this one from here. We're going to access the first index and access the message.content. And then I'm going to call this one as corrected text. Good. So let's try out in the spell check here. Tender client. Supposed to be grammar check. Remember, we have to pass in the text. So in here, I'm going to provide some grammatical error as I ate tomorrow. And let's send. Axios is not defined. Yeah, so I have to bring in Axios here, and now it will work. And I see I will eat tomorrow. We are done with the grammar check. The next one will be the spell check. It's going to be the same thing here in the Axios. And then let's get the text from here. Change this one to text. And then the prompt here is going to be this one as you are a helpful assistant that checks and corrects spelling errors in the following text. Only return the corrected text without any additional comment or context. And in here, we're going to return by accessing the first index and access the message.content. And that is it. So, moment of truth for the spell check. For the spell check, I'm going to provide the text. So in here, I'm going to provide something like eating. And let's see some spelling mistakes here, or the correct one as what? I am eating. So guys, we are done with the OpenAI integration. What has left is the front end. Now that we are done with the API development, we are going to focus on the front end, and that is the React part of our project. And we are going to use Vite to generate our React application. So search for Vite.js and then click on the first search result, or you can go to vitejs.dev, or you can use Create React App. Click on the Get Started, and below here, we're going to use npm to create our React application. Copy that and back to the terminal here. Open the client in the terminal by right-clicking and open in the terminal. So paste that and then hit enter. And for the project name, I'm going to name it as client. So I'm going to use period here and enter. Select React, then the JavaScript, and use npm-i to install all the packages. So in case you gave it a name, make sure to cdn before you use the npm install or I. Alright, it is done. We are going to use Tailwind CSS for the UI. Search for Tailwind CSS and click on the Get Started, and then frameworks and guides. Here I used Vite, so I'm going to use that one by clicking on that. And we are done with the first step. The second step is we have to install Tailwind CSS, copy the code back to the terminal, paste, and enter. Nice. Next step is that is step number 3. We're going to add this code to the tailwind.config.js. So in here, after installing, we're going to see the config file, select all, and then replace the one that we just copied. And lastly, we are going to include the following directives to the main entry point for the CSS. Let's locate the index.css, which is this one, replace with that. And let's run the server as npm run dev. And to make sure that it is being installed, I'm going to copy the app component code back to my entry point, replace with this one, and let's see if you're going to have the Tailwind CSS being installed. And indeed, it has been installed. And for this one, I'll provide you with the final templates. We are going to focus on the main logic. We may need what is called React icons. So search for React icons, which is this one. And then below here, we have the snippet for installing. Copy that, shut down, paste, and we may need Axios also. So hit enter. We are done with the installations. And lastly, we have to install React Router DOM for navigation as React Router -DOM, supposed to be React here, and enter. Okay, cool. We are done with that. Let's have the folder structure first. Let's look at the final one, this one. We have the Navbar. So I'm going to have a component or a folder called component, and I'm going to have one for the navbar.js and also the homepage, then the about. So let's have one for the home.jsx. Remember to use the JSX as an extension when using Vite. So here, rename this one to JSX. And then you may need one for the about.jsx. And then lastly, the form for editing. Let me log in here and click on the right. This is what I mean. This component is for the writing or the editing. So I'm going to have what is called the editor.jsx. And let's go ahead and scaffold our React component. And we have an extension called React Redux as React, and that is ES7 Plus by this author. Alright, so let me go ahead and scaffold. After installing, make use of RAFCE or FC. I prefer to use the export, so I'm going to use RAFCE and hit enter. I have the dummy component. Likewise for the app, I have it, and then the navbar, I have it, and then the home, I also have it. So we have the dummy component. The last step is that we're going to configure using React Router DOM. So let's locate the app.jsx, which is this one. Up here, we are going to import what we need from React Router DOM, and we may need browser router, comma here, route, the individual route. So let's remove this one from here, and I'm going to pass in the JSX, which is this one. I'm going to wrap everything using the browser router inside, pass in the route, and it takes the individual path. The path here is a URL the user is going to match. So in case the user goes to the / it's going to render this component called home. So let's import the home component. Likewise, the about component. And lastly is the edit. And the path here is going to be editor or write. I prefer to use write for this one. And let's bring in the navbar. The navbar, I want it to appear on all the components, so it to be above the route. And let's import it as that. Let's see. Well, my application is not running. Now let's see what we have. Reload, and we have the navbar and home. If I go to about, I have the about, and if I go to write, I have the editor. So I'm going to provide you with the complete code for the home page. Let me close everything from here, component, home here, and then replace with this. Up here, we are using an image. So I'm going to have a folder called images in the SRC as images. And I'm going to provide you with the image, which is this one. Alright, I'm going to use this image, and I am importing the image from here. So let's see the preview. If I get to home here, I have the home page as that. Likewise, the about. Replace with this one. Don't worry, the final source code will be provided. And this is the about. But for the navbar, we're going to use Privy, so we're going to ignore it after the main logic. Then I'll give you the final source code. Now that we have our template ready, it is time for us to begin with the authentication using Privy. We are going to implement authentication on the front end using a library called Privy. If you go to private.io, this is the official documentation. The interface might change depending on the time of watching this video, but the logic is going to be the same. So in here, they have already set up the authentication for us. All what we need is to use it. So to have an account, make sure to click on the dashboard. And for me, I have already logged in or registered. So after logging in, it will take you to your dashboard. And then in here, you can create new app. I'm going to name my app as AI Writing Assistant. And select the environment as web app. And create the app. After creating, let's read more in the documentation. So click on the docs here, which is this. And click on the quick start, which is this one. In here, you're going to use the React SDK. So the first step is that we have to install the SDK or the package. I have copied that back to the project, shut down, and then paste that and enter. It is done. So let's continue with the configuration. Below here, we can integrate into Node.js or create React app. We're going to use it in create React app. So copy the entire code, and then we're going to replace it with our main entry point, and that is the index.js, which is this one. Replace everything with that, and let's look at the structure. It follows the React way by importing the following, our CSS, and the difference here is the provider from Privy. So we're going to wrap application using the Privy provider that ends here, and then we're going to inject our app component. By doing this, we have injected all the functions and logics from the Privy library. In here, you're going to provide our Privy ID. So let's get into our dashboard, which is this one. Let me open this one instead. In here, under the retrieve API keys, click on the settings. And this is our app ID. Copy that and back to the project, replace with this one. Alright, and next step is that the login methods. By default, it is using email and then the wallet. We can include more login methods, so click on the login methods. And in here we have email, and then we can also include SMS registration. So let me turn it off. The choice is up to you. And for the socials, I'm going to use Google. For the Google also, you can pass in your own client ID or your secret key if you want more customization. So save that. And then for Apple, unless you pass in the client ID, which is required. So you can do that. And Twitter also is optional, so I can save that. And then GitHub, do that. And you can include additional login configurations, for example, TikTok. Okay guys, so we are done with the integrations. So guys, we are done with the login methods. Next step is that we have to pass it in the login methods in our code. So bring comma here. We are using Google, comma, and then we are also using TikTok. And what else are we using? Email, GitHub. Yeah, we are also using GitHub. So you can read more in the official documentation. And for the theme, we can choose to use dark or light. And then we can provide our logo. So in here, I have an image as import AI image. In case you have your own logo, then you can import it and use it here. I'm gonna replace with this one as AI. Alright guys, so that is it for the configurations from the Privy library. What has left is that we're going to use the hooks to make our life easier for logging in. If we click on the Privy provider, it's going to give us these hooks that are going to help us to log in, log out, and access the login user. Now that we have Privy being configured, it is time for us to use it. And we're going to focus on the Navbar. We're going to provide a link for the user to log in. At this point, we're going to ignore the styling. At the end, the final source code with the styling will be provided. So in here, we're going to import from Privy and let the structure what is called use Privy, which is this one. And this is a hook. So here I'm going to use it as use Privy. And what comes back from this hook is that one, we're going to have what is called the authenticated, which is authenticated. This is going to help us if the user is logged in or not. And we have what is called ready. The ready here is going to help us either it is loading or not, so that we can show some loading spinner. And next is the login method for logging in, and then the log out. So if I log the authenticated, let's see in the console, we're going to see false. This is our app, not this one, but this one. If I check in the console, reload, my server is not running. Yes, indeed. Let me run the server. And we have it as false, meaning that the user is not logged in. So in case the user is not logged in, then we can show the login button. Otherwise, we can show log out. So in here, I'm going to have some checks. As in case it is not ready, then we can return something like loading. So let's try out. Let me reload. As you can see, you saw the loading here before we got the Navbar. So in here, let me return nav, and I'm going to provide the following as home. Instead of the A tag, we're going to use link from React Router DOM. React Router DOM. What I want here is the link component for navigating the user. So here as link and here as to. The LIs must be in the UL as that. So let's maintain only the about, because the rest is going to be authenticated unless you are logged in. So let's see what we have. If I click on the about and home, they are working. But for the write and log out, we have to check if the user is logged in. So I can have one more LI, and before showing this, So in here, I will say in case it's authenticated, then end operator, we're going to show the li by saying that right here. All right, so let's see. And we don't have the right because the user is not logged in. And in here, we're going to check in case the user is logged in. If it is true, then we're going to show, for example, a div here. Otherwise, show this div. At the moment, let's give it empty placeholders. So in case the user is logged in over here, we're going to show a button or the li by including a button and use a method called onClick and pass in the method called logout from Privy, and we will say logout. Otherwise, change this one to login and then here as logged in. Now, moment of truth. As you can see, I have it as login. If I click on that, I have the login form. Perfect, right? With my image and then with TikTok. But let me change the theme to white. I prefer that. The choice is up to you. So instead of dark, I'm going to use light. Good. So let me try again. Log in. I have it as that, and I can log in with my email. If I do that, they will send me email, the OTP token instead. As you can see, I have provided wrong email, and I prefer to log in with my Google account or GitHub. And as you can see, the login is successful. And welcome to AI Writing Assistant, and I have the logout. I believe at this point you are appreciating what Privy is. Now we can check our application state here in the local storage. As you can see, we have the token being sent to us from Privy. Because of that, I'm going to provide with the complete code for the Navbar. The logic is done. The final source code will be provided, and I have it as that. Right? So I can log out and then log in again. So you're going to work on the right logic, which is this component. This is the component that's going to implement the main logics for this project. So let's locate the editor component, which is this one. For this one also, we are going to ignore the styling, but focusing on the main logic. At the end, the final source code with the styling will be provided. So let's look at the layout first for the final one. We have a form here. But before that, unless we manage the state for this application. And for this, we're going to ignore third-party state management like Redux or Context. Context API is a built-in, but for this, we're going to use useState for local state management. Because of that, we need to bring in all the state. So here, let me require the state here. That is a useState. First of all, we're going to provide the text. Remember, our API endpoint requires us to pass in the text. And then the selected sentences. If you look at the final one, let me provide something like this and then click on the spell check. I have this one. And in here, if I select this one, as you can see, we have the selected text. We have to manage this state, and this state corresponds to that. And next one is a rephrasing. So if I highlight this one, as you can see, I have selected that, and I can go ahead and then rephrase. If I do that, we have the rephrasing as that, so we have to manage that state. Then the corrected sentences, which will be here. For example, if I accept this one, as you can see, we have the state here, so we have to manage that state. Likewise, the spell check, which is this one. If I click on the spell check, I have the spell check data here. I have to manage that, and then the grammar corrected text, which is also this. So now we know the state that we are going to manage. Next step is that we have to bind what the user is typing by using what is called handle change, by using what is called the set text. This means that we have to have the form for entering, and I'm going to use text area. So here as that, let me use a div for this one. We are going to ignore the styling. So let me provide h1 and I will say AI, and let's have the text area as that. And in here, we're going to provide the value. The value here is a 1 in the state. And then on change, bring on change here. For the onChange, we're going to have a function to do that, or we can pass it in line as set text and then pass in the value in the onChange. And remove the ID and the names here. Let's provide placeholder as enter your text. And let's give it a row or rows of say 10. And then 2 buttons. One button is for the spell checking, and the next one is going to be the grammar check. Let's see what we have. All right, we have it as that with the form. I think, yeah, we have the form here without styling. At this point, we have the form, and we're going to have a component for the buttons. So below here, I'm going to have a component called button. And for the button, I'm going to pass in what is called children. So I'm going to destructure a function for onClick, and then the children will represent the individual buttons, and then probably I want to pass in the icon. So on the button here, I'm going to provide onClick, and the onClick will be the function called onClick, and the icon I'm going to use in case we have an icon. So here, in case we have an icon being passed in, then use the icon. So remove this one from here, or let me place it in a span. Span here as that. Now let's use the button. And lastly, I forgot to inject the children as children here. When you get to the usage, you better understand. So let me use it here for the button. And it goes like button. So in here, the first one is called check spelling. And then for the props, we're going to pass in the following as onClick. At the moment, let's remove the function here, or I can use some anonymous function. Remove this one, and let me have some empty function for the onClick. And then the icon. And for the icon, I'm going to use import this from the React icons. And that is the font or some icons. And let me pass in the anonymous function here, and then the icon that goes like this. That is icon, then the FA icon. Let's save it and let's see what we have. This is the icon for that. Let me have one for the grammar check. Copy and paste. Change this one to this icon. Let me import it here as Grammarly. And I will say grammar correction. And we have the icons as that. Let's work on the checking of the spelling, and we are going to talk to our API. Before we continue, let's have the roadmap. One function for handle sentence selection, and one for the rephrase of the sentences, and then one for the add corrected text or sentences, and the logic for checking of the spellings and grammar checks. So we're going to have these 4 functions. Let's begin with the checking of the spellings. So in here, I will say const spell checking is equal to that. And I'm going to mark this function as async. And in between, bring try and catch block. We will need Axios for the HTTP request as import Axios from Axios. So in the try here, I'm going to assign to response which is equal to await axios.post. So in here, we're going to locate our endpoint for spell checking, which is this. Copy the URL back here and then paste that. And remember, we have to pass in the text. So bring comma here and then text by passing in the text. And let's log the results as response.data. So we're going to call this function on the spell checking. Now we have the method to pass in as that. Now let's try out. Let me open the console. Let me clear it and enter something here. Or let me say U and then spell check. And we have the results down there. If I say I'm going and click on spell check, we have I am going, which means that it is working. The next one is the grammar check. But before that, unless we update the state. So in here, I'm going to use set spell checker here. Remember, we have the function here in the state. We're going to update the state by passing in response.data, which is this one. So if you log the spell check text, I'm going to see the result as you saw in the console. So in case something goes wrong, let's just log it. So let's focus on the grammar check. It's going to be the same thing here. I'm going to copy everything in the try here and catch. And then in here, it's going to be as const grammar checker here, which is equal to that, and paste that. The difference here is going to be the endpoint. Copy the entire endpoint here and then replace with this one. We will need the text, and then lastly we're going to update using set grammar checked text. Let me remove the log from here. Lastly, we have to bind it on the button called onClick, pass in here, and let me log something to the console as response.data. And let's see in case the grammar one will work. Click on that. I have some text inside. And indeed, it has been logged. Now that the two logics are working, we are going to display the result. If you look at the final one, as you can see, we have the result being added here. And for this, it looks similar. The difference here is the content for the result. We are going to have one component that we can reuse. I'm going to call this one as result section. So after the button here, I'm going to have a component as result section, which is equal to function as that. But before that, we are going to check in case we have a text. So in case we have one, then we're going to display the JSX as that. So I'm going to have a div for that, supposed to be const. All right, so let me just display h1 and I will say result. So how are we going to use this one? So below the form here, and that is the text area, I'm going to have a comment as result. To do that, I'm going to use the component as result section. With this one, let's try out. Let me get into what we are building, which is this one, and we have text is not defined. The issue here is that we have to pass in the text here. So let me destructure as text, and this one will fix the issue. So if I provide something like this and then click on spell check, and we have text is not defined, which means that upon calling the component, we have to pass in the text. So here, let me just use some dummy text here as checked spelling or check spelling. With this one, let me reload. And I have the result here. So let me try something like this, because by default, I have passed in some text. That is why we see it as that. So if I give it as empty here, I'll not see the text, right? So let's continue to implement the result section. So apart from the text, we will accept the title of the component and a function called onAccept. And lastly, icon for that. So at the moment, let's have some dummy JSX. So I'm going to have h3 and pass in the title and also maybe some icon here as dash and then the icon name and then the text that I want to show by using P and pass in the text. And lastly, a button to accept. Remember, we have the button component, therefore we can reuse. So in here, pass in on the onAccept. So upon calling this component, we have to pass in the function called onAccept. So with this one, let's see, and we don't have anything here. We have to pass in the following props. The text here is going to be the spell check as spell check text, and then the title as spell check text, and then the icon is going to be FA pencil icon or check, and then lastly the event as onAccept. I'm going to use the add corrected text. At the moment, it doesn't exist. Therefore, I'm going to use the console log. So let's see what we have. And we have the result as that. So let's work on the accept. So we have one for the spell check. The next one is going to be the grammar check. So copy this one and then paste it. Change this one to grammar check. And then the icon here is equal to that. So let's see what we have. And we have the responses as that. All right, so what has left is the function to add the corrected text. So let's pass in the function here and we are going to create it right away. So let's get up here. After this, let me add a comment and I will say add corrected text is equal to that. And for this, we're going to pass in the sentence the user wants to add. All right, so in here, I'm going to use set corrected sentences and spread the existing one and add the new one. So I'm going to call this one in here because we're going to pass in the sentence. We have to call it as that and then bring our parentheses and pass in the spell check text. And for this one is going to be grammar corrected text or checked text. With this one, let's try out. Pass in something like this and click on that. So next step is we're going to display the selected text. So below here, in case we have the selected sentences, then we are going to display the JSX. I'm going to use div and I will say the selected sentences. So I'm going to pass in p tag here and I will say selected sentence. So let's go ahead and add the rephrasing logic. So let's get up here and I will say rephrasing, which is equal to const rephrase sentence. For this, we're going to talk to our API at the backend as async. And the way we did for the grammar, I'm going to copy everything from here and then paste it. The difference here is the endpoint as analyze. And then here is going to be sentence. Remember, that's what the API requests. And then change this one to rephrase sentences. And in case something goes wrong, we are going to log the result as that. We are going to use this logic in the selected sentence here. So bring the button component, and then the onClick is equal to the rephrase sentence, and the icon is this one. And before we try out, let's add the selection, which is handle sentence selection. And for this, there will be no sentence being passed in. We're going to use a method from JavaScript as selection is equal to window dot get selection, and let me convert to a string. And in case we have the selection, then we are going to set the selected sentence and pass in the selection from this. So we're going to apply this one on the onMouse event on the text area. The text area is somewhere here. Pass in on mouse app. As soon as the user releases the mouse, we're going to apply this event. Alright, so we are done with the logics. What has left is a UI. So I'm going to provide you with a complete code. Definitely the final source code will be provided. Alright, so let's see what we have. We have an error that is login is not defined. With this one, save it and let's see, and we have it as that. So if I provide this, paste it and check, we have the result. If I accept it, I have the selection, the grammar checker, it is working, select, and then let's see the event, we have it, and then rephrase, we have, and I can accept. What has left is to protect this component from unauthorized users, meaning that unless you are logged in before you can use this component on this application. This is where the PrivateRoute comes in. We are going to implement protection of route in case the user is not logged in on the front end. So here in the component, I'm going to have a component called PrivateRoute.jsx. Let me scaffold the component as that, and we will need use Privy from Privy because we want to check in case the user is logged in. So I'm going to destructure from Privy, which is equal to use Privy. What we want is the authenticated and then the ready state. So here, in case it is loading, and that is if it is not ready, then we are going to return some JSX by saying loading. And below here, we know that it is not loading. Then we are going to check in case the user is logged in. So I'm going to return from here, which is equal to authenticated. In case it is true, then we're going to return what is called children. I'm going to destructure the children. The children here represent the component that we want to protect. So let me remove this one from here, and then bring the children here. Otherwise, we are going to navigate the user to the login page. So in here, we are going to use navigate component from React Router DOM. And then instead of this, we're going to use that component as navigate and pass in to and the path we want the user to go to. At the moment, we don't have the component for logging in, so I'm going to provide that component, and definitely the final source code will be provided. It follows the same principles. So in here, we are accessing the login ready and then the authenticated from Privy. And here we are using useState to check that. And in case it is loading, I'm going to show this. Otherwise, we're going to show this one as AI writing and pass in the method for logging in. So if I come here, if I log out and log in, not this one. If I go to the home page, I have what is called start writing. And as you can see, I have the page. That is the start writing. So we have to pass in the login component to the app. We don't have it here. Change this one to login page and login. So for login, if I visit, not this one, supposed to be login. As you can see, I can log in from here because I have the event being binded on that. If you check the button, we have the login method from Privy, likewise the logout. I think we don't have the logout on the login. Alright, so let's continue with the logic. So here we have the path the user will be navigated to. Alright, so how are we going to use this? It's going to be simple using React Router. So in here, we are going to decide the component that we want to protect. So we are going to remove the way we are calling this. We're going to provide high order function, that is our custom component, as PrivateRoute. And the children here is a component that I want to protect. And that is it with this one. If I try to go to the right, as you can see, I have been redirected. But if I log in, and now I can access the protected component. Alright guys, so here ends this project.